Welcome back. Jessica Levinson is with Loyola Law School, teaches election law. Dan Schnurr is a professor of political communications at UC Berkeley and USC. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us. So, Jessica, Democrats may hate to hear this, but it was a pretty good week for the president.
Look, life is comparative. Politics are comparative. If you look at President Trump's week, you're right. Highlighting homelessness in blue California is going to be, frankly, a win for Republicans. Highlighting the issues of federal government's power over the environment. I think that this was largely a win. The question is it a win for anybody outside his base? I mean, as we're now heading towards 13 months before the election, are any of the swing voters in the swing states looking and saying, yeah, I think that those are some good points he's making?
Right, but Dan, picking on California is not a bad strategy.
Absolutely not. I go back to my home state of Wisconsin, and what I will tell you in the Midwest, they think we're hilarious. And what Donald Trump has very effectively figured out a way to capitalize is to point out to all those hardworking, salt-of-the-earth Midwesterners that us kooky Californians can't even provide enough housing for our people. That said, Conan, like every week for Donald Trump, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. On one hand, he came out to California and made fun of us. He went home with lots of money. On the other hand, there's questions arising about whether he is trying to bribe the government of Ukraine into investigating his opponent in next year's election. There's good, there's bad. That's what you got with the president.
That's true. Let's move on to the Democratic race. Kamala Harris is putting it all into Iowa. If she doesn't come out of Iowa with a win or a place, second or third, is she done?
Pretty much. I mean, Kamala Harris's greatest strength is when she's on, she's an extraordinarily powerful communicator. We saw it in the Kavanaugh hearings. We saw it with Jeff Sessions in the Judiciary Committee. We saw it in the first debate when she took on Joe Biden. But the challenge for Harris is this. She's not as progressive as Warren or Sanders. She's not as establishment as Joe Biden. She's been having real trouble articulating exactly where she fits into this field. And in order to get that first or second place finish, I think voters are going to have need to have a much more clear sense of her than they do right now.
Jessica, she had a moment. She was in double digits after she took on Joe Biden in the first debate.
She had a couple of moments. She had a great rollout. There's a huge crowd in Oakland when she said, I'm running for president. And it did feel like this inspirational moment where maybe what we had seen in California for years, which is somebody who frankly seemed like she didn't want to take a position until she knew it was politically popular, like she didn't want to get out in front of any controversial issue. It seemed like maybe now she's had her moment. She was just waiting until she hit this stage. And then at the first debate, it looked like, okay, is this the real Kamala Harris? And then I think she fell back to the person who we in California have known for years, the person who says, I want to have a conversation about that instead of I want to give you an answer about that.
Elizabeth Warren says, I've got a plan for that. Kamala Harris says, let's have a conversation about that. That's not a sustainable comparison. That said, it's 4 months before the voters start voting. She's got plenty of time to turn this around, but she's going to have to more sharply define that message.
You had a great piece in The Hill, an interesting piece in The Hill newspaper, where you said the Democratic field are operating as if this is a regular presidential election, and they're missing an opportunity.
I think they're missing a huge opportunity. Whenever I turn on the debates, I feel like it's 2015 and we're all in this old paradigm and we're just talking about what's the best way to find our path to our shared goals. And that's just simply not where we are in America in 2019. I do think that our country is facing an existential crisis. And when I turn on the debates, people are beating up on President Obama more than they're beating up on President Trump. Democrats could decide, let's put our egos aside. Who has the best chance of winning? I know everybody thinks this is not going to happen because it won't. But let's put our egos aside. Let's figure out who can get those swing voters in the swing states, not who can get great turnout numbers in California, who's likely to win. And let's stop giving President Trump turn-by-turn directions for how to beat up the Democratic nominee.
There are two schools of thought on this within the Democratic field. One school of thought, which Biden and his supporters will make, that you got to win the political center, you got to bring back those swing voters, that's how you win an election. What you hear from Warren, what you hear from Sanders, what you hear from Harris and their supporters is that if you look at how turnout dropped in 2016 among African American voters, among Latino voters, and among young voters, that even in those purple states in the industrial Midwest, if you can turn out the Democratic base in a way that Barack Obama did and Hillary Clinton didn't, that's the path to victory. In the meantime, though, as Jessica pointed out, a 19-way firing squad looks like a Quentin Tarantino movie. And the real challenge, and she's exactly right on this also, and by the way, the piece was great, is arguing the nuances and difference of healthcare reform is not going to lead the Democratic Party back to power, more as well as a broader indictment. And I feel like the Democratic nominee, in addition to policy detail, needs to frame a broader, almost moral case against the president. Arguing tit for tat on policy is probably not going to be as compelling.
Dan Schnur and Jessica Levinson, thank you very much to both of you for coming. Up next, USC has a new president when we return.